Hi everyone, hope you all had a good Christmas and Happy New Year. So, as you can see, I'm joined by two lovely people. So, I will let them introduce themselves, and you guys are from Thomas Pocklington Trust?
Correct.
Yeah, so could you just introduce yourselves for me, please?
Do you want me to go first? Yeah. So, I'm Louise, Senior Engagement Manager for Central England at Thomas Pocklington Trust. And today we're joined by one of our wonderful Sight Loss Council members, Meena.
Hi guys, so thank you for taking the time to come and speak with me today. So obviously I've sent you through some questions that I'd like to ask you, and I suppose the first one really is quite simple in the fact that please can you tell me a bit about yourself, whether that's personal life, maybe about your disability.
Meena?
Yeah. So like Louise said, I'm a member of the Sight Loss Councils in the Black Country. I've been visually impaired from birth. I have a dual sensory loss, hearing loss and visual. I'm a mum to two children, and I enjoy the volunteering roles that I do.
Perfect, thank you for that, Meena. And what about yourself, Louise?
So I'm also registered severely sight impaired, have been since birth. But I do have some residual vision. Also married, two children. Like to get out and socialise and enjoy a gin or two when we're not working on these wonderful projects with our volunteers. But yeah, pretty much just like to do what most people do, go out and play hard and work hard.
Yeah, so I suppose obviously sight loss, which is something that we've just briefly discussed before coming onto this podcast in any case, but I think sight loss is a very interesting type of disability from the point of view that it's quite overseen and overlooked to a degree. I think when you think about sight loss, you don't think that, you know, that's a type of disability that's severely impacted as such or anything. But I'm just wondering, first question that really pops to mind in my head is, how do you see the world with sight loss, if you don't mind me asking?
So for myself, there are various adaptations that we have. We kind of work around things. For example, a smartphone is our best friend. There's many apps on there that help us just read labels, talk back, audio, reading, etc. And obviously having Braille as one of the methods to read as well.
Mm.
Yeah, I think it's like you say, it's such a diverse sector that no individual with sight loss will be the same as the next one. You know, we could have a group of 20, 30, 50 people here and we would all see differently and experience the world in a different way. So people who have had sight loss from birth, for example, may learn adaptations, workarounds, little tips and tricks, just the same as anyone growing up would learn their world. But if someone's acquired sight loss later on in life, they know what they're missing. They've got to relearn all of that all over again, which sometimes can be easy, sometimes can be more difficult. Like, you know, it's an individual circumstance. As Meena said already, there are ways that we can make our lives easier. Technology is a big one of those. But then working with organisations like yourself to try and have input into implementing change in the world. You know, we live in a very sighted world. We don't expect it to be a non-sighted world. There are just things that can be done to make our lives a little bit easier, and the work that the Sight Loss Councils do is really important, to be able to work with those organisations and service providers to say, actually, this is what you're doing well, this is what maybe isn't working so well, but we have a solution to make that better for you and for us.
And I suppose that sort of brings me on to the next question that I've got. Obviously, you said that we live in a sighted world. What are some of the barriers that you guys face on a day-to-day basis?
How long have you got? there are different barriers on a day-to-day basis. I could give you some examples. Just simply a trip to the GPs sometimes can be awkward. Not being able to see, not being able to hear audio, name shouted out. Supermarkets, busy environments, hospitality, cinema, bowling. The list is endless. So I think planning a journey or a day, it's got to be well planned to meet your needs, I would say.
And just quickly, Meena, because I know that you've just said planning a day, it's got to be well planned.
It has to be well planned, and depending on your needs, the person working with you has to have that time and patience, understand you well, because you are putting that full trust in them. And even if you are doing something independently, it does have to be planned, and there has to be a plan A, B and C in place.
And would you say that's quite stressful?
It can be. If those things aren't put in place, then sometimes it's impossible to do.
And what about yourself, Louise? Have you got any examples of barriers that you've got to face?
Absolutely. I think just feeding off what Meena said previously, the biggest obstacle and barrier, I would say, is transport. Because you can have the most accessible service, the most accessible venue, everything can be accessible. If you can't get from point A to point B because the transport isn't accessible, it might as well not be there because you can't access that. And then I think the other thing that I would say is something that we deal with regularly, is lack of awareness. The general public sometimes think that they're being really helpful by grabbing your arm and dragging you over the road because they think you can't see to get across, which sometimes you can't, but we are taught and learn our own ways of dealing with things and coping strategies. If we don't have any peripheral vision, like I don't, and someone comes to me from the side and just grabs me, I'm like, are they going to attack me? Am I about to be mugged? Like, their intentions are positive because they just want to help, but it hinders because then they can take you off-piste and you can be somewhere that you don't know, you're a bit disorientated, you haven't gone the exact journey that you would have potentially gone. So there are lots of small things that mount up to big things sometimes, and it can be difficult, but it can also be amazing. There are wonderful people out there, and that's why we love to do the work that we do, to try and raise that awareness and show people how they can be more helpful in just within their communities to people with sight loss. Definitely, and I think that's the main thing, isn't it? Because sight loss, as you've just said, it can affect everyone completely differently. So what would help for one person isn't necessarily going to be helpful to another. So it is just all that about that individualised touch as well, that if you can create more awareness within society, it's going to be beneficial overall, isn't it? So obviously you've both said that you've got kids of your own and everything, and I'm really aware, as I've just mentioned, my sister's not long had a baby, and I think from my point of view and lots of others with disabilities and long-term health conditions, it does sort of make you evaluate, with my disability, is that something that's going to hinder me, like being able to have kids of my own and even be able to be a good parent with my disability? What are some of the things that you have put in place to enable you to parent well, if you don't mind me asking? I don't mean to sound that intrusive or anything. Do you want to go?
I think for myself, I am blessed that I have my parents' support bringing my children up, and I've got my husband as well. In terms of the kids, I think kids naturally, they just pick up what mum is okay to do and what she isn't okay to do. So as the kids are growing up and as you're kind of growing up with them as well, I think families just automatically adapt, they know. But at the same time, I think it does make your children more confident, because there are certain things that they just have to do by themselves that parents with visual impairment can't really support them with.
What are your thoughts, Louise? Is there anything in place that you had to put?
Yeah, I think, do you know what? I'm not an emotional person, but talking about the kids always really is.
Yeah.
Like, no, it's fine, don't worry. But, you just have to understand that there are some things you can't do, and that's the way of life. But then there are some things that people would expect that you can't do that you absolutely can. So like I can't, or choose not to is probably the best word, take my children to the park by myself, because the fear in the back of my head is that anyone could snatch them. I couldn't give a description of who they are. I wouldn't know if they were more than a metre away from me. Like, I follow my children around the park like they're on a dog lead, because I don't have any choice but to tackle that situation any other way. So I just choose not to do it independently. But then, like school, for example, my children will wear the brightest coat that is possible in the winter so that I can pick them out. In the summer, I struggle to identify my children in a playground because they've all got summer dresses on and they all look the same. Like, luckily for me, my children are very short. So I just pick out the littlest kid in the class, and that one's mine. Clearly they don't get that from me. I'm quite tall. But I think my vision impairment never bothered me in a way until I had children, because I never had to be that designated driver, you know. Didn't have to be the one that had to drink Coke that night instead of having a cocktail, you know. People were always willing to help you as an individual. It's one seat in a car, it's one person, like, it's no problem. But then when you have kids and, you know, you've got the 6 weeks holiday or you've got Christmas and, you know, they want to go out and do stuff and they want to go to the zoo or they want to go to the safari park or whatever, and you just have to say no. Like, that isn't possible. And I think that's what hurts. Yeah. That, you know, that both of my girls are amazing and they've grown up understanding the restrictions that we have. And when my husband's off work, we can do those things, but when Daddy's at work, we can't. We can only go places that we can walk or get to on public transport. Because taxis, you know, I can't carry car seats around. Yeah. So from a safety perspective, I don't feel comfortable them not having a car seat. So we choose not to do that until they're old enough. So there are things that they've grown up knowing we can only do with Daddy. Yeah. But then they're also so compassionate. Like, it's not just with people with a vision impairment. Like, my children are so accepting of people with any kind of disability because they see the barriers that Mummy has, that they want to help other children and other adults.
And I think that's one thing that is absolutely fantastic with the work that we're doing collectively across different organisations, you guys having kids and stuff, you know, and your kids having that natural awareness. Yeah. That's the future generations of our society that is going to really help make things far more accessible and inclusive overall, because they have far more understanding as someone without any disability or long-term health condition, because they have that lived experience, don't they? And I think that's the main thing, is from the work that I do, probably actually looking at how things are going to be made more inclusive, because it's all well and good us guys shouting from the rooftops with our own disability, but unless more people have that basic level of awareness, it's never going to get better, I personally don't believe.
Yeah, and it's not all, you know, doom and gloom. You know, the last 5-minute conversation may make it sound like it is, but it absolutely isn't. There are daily challenges, but then people that don't have disabilities have daily challenges. Yeah. And, you know, we all overcome things in a different way. But I think to continue to move forward with the work that we're doing as a collective sector, to encourage, it has to start from children. You know, children, they learn their behaviours as they grow up. And I think, you know, my daughter will happily go and speak to a child or an adult that's in a wheelchair or on crutches, and that isn't a barrier, because she doesn't see that barrier. And I think, you know, Thomas Pocklington Trust, Sight Loss Councils, lots of other organisations are doing so much good work across different elements of the sector that hopefully that education does start to make a difference. But I do think we need to start with children in schools. And
definitely, I couldn't agree more with that. So obviously you've just said that it's not all doom and gloom. So putting a bit more of a positive spin on it, I was just wondering, what type of strengths would you say your sight loss has given you over the years?
I can guess your number one.
What is it?
Problem solving. Like, we are the best problem solvers.
Yeah, absolutely.
On the planet, because we have to be.
Yeah.
We have to solve problems to get up and get out of the house every day.
It is just generally part of your life. You do have to master it. I know it sounds like how do you do it? You just have to do it like any other person. But for myself, throughout my life, different people come from different backgrounds. So there's the culture barriers. There's so many barriers that you have to overtake, not just your sight loss or your disabilities. So for me personally, I would say the last 3 years have probably been the best years of my life. Being part of TPT, it has given me that confidence to be someone that has sight loss, but enable myself to do much more.
Yeah.
So Meena won an award at our annual conference a few weeks ago. I don't think she was expecting to win the award, and it was a wonderful weekend. But why don't you tell Ashleigh about that?
I actually cried for a whole week. I don't know
what award did you win?
The Outstanding Contribution Award for this year. But I really, really am passionate about Thomas Pocklington Trust. I don't think they realise how much of a positive impact they've had on me.
Yeah.
But it has helped me to grow in so many ways. I'm getting tearful now.
But yeah, I think like problem solving is one of the biggest ones. I think we use our other senses in ways that the average Joe probably doesn't, because they don't pick up on those senses as much as we do. I think we're outside of the box thinkers. And I say to my boss quite often in team meetings, if it's blaringly obvious, I might not get it, because I live outside the box. I'm not in that box. But it makes us quite creative thinkers, I think. And you'll see from it like the passion that our volunteers bring to the projects that we work on it's amazing, it's wonderful, and you probably have the same with your guys as well.
Yeah.
That they make the world a better place. They're often in places that aren't the most amazing, and to watch them flourish from coming and joining a community group and an advocacy group that they want to inspire to do something, and then you see them reach that target, and it's like they're my children as well. Like I'm just as proud of them as I am my kids.
Definitely. And I think for me as well, when you've got a disability or long-term health condition, and I see it when you've been born with one, I'd say I feel fortunate, because the people who end up acquiring a disability or long-term health condition over the years, they've got to get used to a completely different way of living. So I view myself with my disability, because I was born with it, in my own right, I am able-bodied, because I don't know any different.
Yeah.
It's always been that way for me, to the point that I remember I broke my right wrist a few years ago when I fell off one of my horses, and I actually could feel it, and I don't have any feeling throughout the right side, and it really freaked me out. I was like, oh my God, I don't like this. I wanted to go back to normal. I don't like feeling it or anything. But actually, I think when you develop that resilience, like we all do when you've got a disability or long-term health condition, it makes you want to achieve more things.
Yeah, like you've got a point to prove.
Yeah, not just to everyone else, but to yourself. And I always think that one thing that people throughout my life have said to me, that actually, whilst it's been a negative thing, it's potentially been one of the most positive phrases that they've ever said is, you can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because scrap that tea.
Yeah. So for me, that's the worst thing anyone possibly can ever say to me, because I feel obligated, even if I don't want to do it,
just
I've got
to prove a point.
to do it to prove a point. And I think that's it, isn't it? I think that's the magical bit about having your disability or long-term health condition, because you see how positive people are, and it's amazing, you know, seeing you guys within Include Me, with Thomas Pocklington Trust as well, and everything, with how much you guys do. You know, you put in some good into something that you've got and actually really using it to your advantage.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
fantastic, isn't it?
It is, and we say quite regularly, you know, our USP is our volunteers.
Yeah.
You know, sight loss councils would not exist without the wonderful people with that lived experience, and taking that lived experience into what often can be some really important conversations with, you know, CEOs and people in power. You know, we've done events down in Westminster and spoken to the MPs and government departments and NHS trusts. You know, they are listening, and it's taken the time and the effort for us to put that relationship building in, and for them to understand that we're not a moaning group. We're not here to whinge. I mean, we may have to whinge to get our point across, but we're not coming to you with problems for you to solve.
It's with a solution-orientated approach.
Absolutely. We don't want you to move mountains. We don't want you to change the world. We don't expect the world to change for us. But what we do expect is to be able to access those services and access those venues in the world that already exists, exactly the same as our next door neighbours do.
Definitely. And I suppose, really, you know, talking about accessibility and making things easier to access, what type of things, and I know that you guys were talking about different technology, Meena, that you use to read labels and everything. What other things do you have in place to overcome some of your barriers?
Starting from home, I think contrast is a big thing. So let me pick a room, kitchen. So your chopping boards have to be a certain colour to go against your onions. Your knives have to be put away in a certain place. Mine are colour coordinated for bread, meat, etc. My colander is a bright colour, so it's there. It's I've got different colours going on in the kitchen, so I know what's what. In terms of walls, I've got nice bright walls, dark furniture, so there's a nice contrast going on there. I don't have a black cushion on a black sofa. I wouldn't be able to see it. My remote controls, they have bright stickers on, so if they are against the sofa, because the black control against black sofa, I wouldn't be able to see it. But with this bright sticker on, I'm able to kind of point out where the remote is, because your family, as well as they know you, they don't always put things back where they belong, and that can be the most frustrating thing. But on the other side, I am willing to kind of accept that and think, okay, they're only human, they can forget to put things back. So it's important I have stickers around the house, I have pom-poms on my washing machine, my cooker. So all of these adaptations are made to suit me in my own home.
And are those just like those adaptations, things that you've come to learn over the years?
Although I've had sight loss since birth, but my vision has deteriorated over the years. And I did become deaf in my left ear at the age of 24. So over the years, I've had to adapt to certain things. And the older that I'm getting, the vision is still deteriorating. So there's always a little bit of a change that I have to adapt. So last year, maybe I could have seen a little bit better on the table, a glass there. If it's a dark glass on a nice and bright table, but sometimes it depends on the vision daily. It might not be good one day, and it might be a little bit better the next day. So, but yeah, contrast is a big thing for me.
And what about yourself, Louise?
I think like coping mechanisms. You know, we could sit here for hours and tell some funny stories about how, you know, I've used Savlon as toothpaste, or how I've put deodorant in my hair thinking it's hairspray, or, you know, whatever. We learn different ways of telling the difference. So, you know, like I'll put a hair bubble on my shampoo and I won't put a hair bubble on the conditioner, because I'm a little bit OCD, and they've got to come from the same brand. It's got to match. But then the shower gel will be a completely different bottle shape. So even when you've got your eyes closed in the shower, or if your eyesight isn't good enough to see the bottle, you can feel it. So it's very tactile. Going back to what Meena said, like I remember when I first got with my husband, he was like, "Oh, you're so OCD about all of these things. It drives me insane." And he'd think he was funny by like moving things, and I'd be like, "I know that I've put it there. Where the hell is it disappeared to?" Or like in my cupboard, all the tins of beans have got to be facing this way in a line on the left, and then the mushy peas go next, and then the tuna goes next, because I know I don't even have to try to look at that cupboard. I know I open my cupboard, I know exactly what I'm picking up. But he thought he was funny and he could just move it all around because I was just a little bit OCD like that. And I'm like, no, it's because I can't see very well. Like, stop it.
Yeah.
But I think the biggest takeaway that I would say is we're human. We have a sense of humour. If you're doing it on purpose, like my husband is, you're going to get telling off, like, stop being an idiot. But we often find ourselves up against organisations or companies or service providers that are scared to get it wrong, so they just don't try. And I'm like, we're not going to be offended by the word see, or did you watch so-and-so, or, it goes over our head most of the time, but people would rather not have a conversation than worry that they're going to say something that offends us.
Yeah.
And you're like, don't. The effort that you put in to try, we appreciate.
Yeah. And that speaks volumes, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
I think that's potentially one of the biggest issues that I see with all this political correctness stuff. Because as much as I appreciate, obviously, there are things that are really offensive and they don't have a place. I would much rather someone turn around to me and say, right, I know that you're disabled. You can't use the one side of your body. What do I need to do to make it feel like you're not as disabled within this like specific activity or whatever? I'd appreciate that far more rather than someone tiptoeing around and going, let's just ignore the elephant in the room. She can't do it. Let's just ignore that and let her get on with what she's doing.
That's even more isolating.
Yeah.
And I think it goes back to like the social model of disability, doesn't it? We're only disabled because of the world that we live in.
Yeah.
If the world was more accommodating and more accessible, a lot of the things that we struggle with, we wouldn't struggle with. And that's why we're here, to try and make that better.
Definitely. So, Meena, I know that Louise has brought you here today because she can't read Braille and everything.
She's far more intelligent than me.
Can't get the staff these days. So, I think one of my biggest questions, obviously, I do find sight loss absolutely fascinating in terms of how you guys do things, and one of my biggest questions that I've had over the years, how do you even learn how to read Braille?
I was actually quite fortunate. I was taught at school. In my teenage years, it was one of the options that we had at the time, and I find it very therapeutic. So I did want to learn it at an early age. I think it's about 11 when I first started, and I finished my grade 2 by 13. So I learnt it slowly over the years at school, and I absolutely loved it. But leaving school and then getting married, having kids and so on, I hadn't used it for years.
Yeah.
So I kind of relearnt it a few years ago. And I think I started to relearn it having the scare of being totally blind one day.
Yeah.
So when I relearnt it, it was kind of brought my childhood back. It was because, again, I found it very therapeutic. But I don't use Braille on a day-to-day basis, but I do actually teach adults now who want to learn Braille at a voluntary group. So I really do love Braille. It is therapeutic. You'll have to give it a try.
Yeah, so like in terms, because as I say, that's always something that I've found really confusing. Would you say it's easy to learn, or would you say it is
easy to learn? I wouldn't just say that. Most people would just do grade 1, which is fine. Grade 2 is more complex if you want to read detail articles, books, etc. But if you just want to know the basics, grade 1 is more than enough.
Yeah.
But my question to you now,
Oh God.
Where have you seen Braille?
Where have I seen Braille? So on lifts and everything. When I used to compete, I had like a real good friendship group, which did have a couple of people with sight loss, and the amount that we'd like take the mick out of each other, they'd like pretend they'd actually put sesame seeds down and stuff, and like tried passing it off as Braille and everything, which, like, as I say, you've got to have a good sense of humour to be able to have a laugh and a joke, don't you?
Absolutely.
But I think when Meena said it's not something she does daily, is because it's not available daily. And I think it's such a shame that, you know, we're very fortunate one of our other sight loss council members that transcribes certain documents into Braille, but it's not easily available. You can't just go into a restaurant and ask for a Braille menu, which you should be able to do. Yeah. You know, you can't access, if Braille is your only form of communication, it could be quite a lonely world, because it's not there. It's not available for you to pick up a leaflet like you would be able to pick a leaflet up in the doctor's surgery, for example.
Yeah. So that's quite interesting, actually, that you should say that, because I think from my point of view, obviously not having sight loss, when you've got a box of medication, whether that's paracetamol, ibuprofen, when you go to an event, or, you know, you just want to go to the lift or something, as I say, you can see the Braille there and everything, you'd automatically have that assumption.
Yeah, that everything would be.
It's everywhere.
Yeah. And there are certain things, like you say, with medication, but if taking that point, if you were to go to your GP surgery and they prescribed you some medication for a chest infection, for example, and they accompanied that medication with a leaflet that had best practice tips to help you get better, you're not going to get that at the same time that you're getting your medication with the Braille on that box. And I think these are things that should be readily available. And quite often, you know, they'll be on the back of leaflets, if you need this in an alternative format, call so-and-so. Well, if you can't read the leaflet that tells you it's available in an alternative format, then how do you know where to get it?
Yeah. So, okay, so with like news and everything, so, you know, taking the pandemic as a prime example, if you were unable to read the news and you weren't listening to it, how else would you actually be able to have access to it? Because I know there's like sight loss newspapers, isn't there?
Yeah, so the Talking News.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about the Talking News?
Yeah, so again, the Talking News is audible. There is nothing out there in Braille at the moment. So if I was in that situation, I think it would be pure isolation.
Yeah.
If I couldn't access the audible. But I do know that some organisations do give, if you buy a product, they do give manuals to go with it in Braille.
Yeah.
But again, it's not available everywhere.
Yeah, so, and it's all of these things, isn't it, that obviously needs a lot more awareness to make it more readily
Even a
available.
simple brochure for booking a holiday, if that was in Braille, people would be more relaxed in booking. They know what they're getting. They're not relying on someone else to read it for them, make a decision for them. It gives you that personal thing that you can do that yourself.
And allows you that more independence, doesn't it? But yeah. Okay, so thank you for taking the time to speak with me today. I suppose just to round up, if you could describe what your sight loss have given to you in terms of 3 words, what would those 3 words be? What has sight loss given to you?
Passion. I would say confidence, but it's taken a very long time to get there. I wish sometimes I could give my 5 or 10-year-old self the confidence that I have now. And resilience, I would say.
Those are 3 good words. And what about yourself, Meena?
Yeah, I agree with Louise, but the way I am now, I do feel more confident than I've ever been. So the future is bright for me.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, thank you for taking the time to speak with me, and I hope everyone has enjoyed it. And as I say, Happy New Year. And if you have any other questions that you'd like me to ask Louise or Meena, shoot me an email or comment on this video and let me know, and I'll put them forward to them. See you later.
Bye.
Bye.